Sean O'Malley and Petr are some of the most exciting fighters to watch in the bantamweight division. Every time they step into the cage, they bring the fight.
Back to work on the jab. Oh! Spinning power.
More respect, Chris Mutino.
Petr has proven where he stands at the top of the division with some pretty impressive performances, but the question we're all anticipating here is how well Sean O'Malley can handle such a savage opponent. For a while, Sean hasn't exactly gone for many of the top contenders of the division, however, he's put on a really entertaining showcase of skill and brutality. At this point, everyone's asking, let's see how he does against a better opponent. This fight is a really interesting one to explore, and it really forced me to revisit some of Sean's most recent fights to get a feel of how he's developed so far, and I have to say I found some interesting things. After getting to absorb some of their signature habits, this fight had me thinking about a lot of intriguing things that you might want to consider if you are betting on this fight. And speaking of bets, there's a really cool community I want to tell you about later in the video. They're called the BNB Pot, and there's more about that later in the video. Sean O'Malley and Petr have very unique fighting styles to say the least, but how do their styles clash, and what tricks do they have at their disposal? Let's begin at the most obvious starting point, OMalleys Range and his long fighting style. Sean is fairly tall for the division with a really good reach, and not only does he know how to use that reach, he does it quite well. He also has a diverse array of kicking setups that allow him to fight at a long range if he decides to bring the fight there. He likes using his push kicks to stab at the opponent's body, and he'll regularly switch up the rhythm. For example, when he fires at the body or the leg with a push kick, he'll then throw a fake kick to use that to transition into his punches instead. O'Malley might be able to pick at Jan's guard at a long range, but a very important thing you'll need to keep in mind is that Jan's guard is probably one of the most dangerous guards O'Malley has had to face thus far. Jan is fairly good at finding counters off of his guard work, and not just that, Jan tends to have a lot of answers for various attacks. With kicks, Jan doesn't just allow you to give shots on his guard and let you get away with it without some kind of form of punishment in return. Expect a retaliation. And it may not come early, but in time it will find its way with his deceptive rhythm and he'll punish you. Fighting long with kicks could be viable for O'Malley, but it could become a liability as well. Jan is quite good at punishing kicks, and if you feed him a kick, he may use it against you. He often catches the kicks if you feed it to him in order to dump you with a variety of foot sweeps. If you try spinning kicks, you risk giving up your back to Jan, which could turn ugly. Fighters giving up their back to Jan often seeing themselves getting scissor swept or dumped in one way or another. These are very possible threats you have to consider against a fighter like Jan. Interestingly, Corey Sandhagen came into this fight against Jan more conservative about firing his kicks as much, and it seemed like he respected those threats of getting his leg caught, so he came in with a more boxing-centric approach. Again, O'Malley could be another story when it comes to fighting long with kicks, since he tends to be better at disguising them in various rhythms compared to Jan's other opponents. So the question here is if O'Malley's kicking game could withstand Jan's aggressive guard. In order to get a clear read of O'Malley's most updated style and what it looks like, I had to study his most recent fights, and I was amused with what I found. In his fight with Thomas Almeida, O'Malley would often use his look-away feint to set up different attacks, and if you were to fast forward today against more recent fights like Pedro Munoz or Chris Mutino, he's almost pretty much abandoned that fake entirely. This makes my job a little harder because his tools are always changing, however most of his strategic approach remains the same. He still aims to fight long and uses footwork to keep the fight in his advantage. The Chris Mutino fight sparked my interest particularly because this wasn't a typical fight where O'Malley would just burst through the opponent and we wouldn't learn much from it. This was a drawn out fight where we'd see O'Malley put in scenarios, and this is what we learned a lot from. Chris is a fighter who heavily relies on his guard to pressure forward quite often to cut you off. This really forced O'Malley to fight on the back foot, and it showed the extent of his pace and his ability to handle the pressure. O'Malley showed really good display of timing when Chris would come forward to pressure with his high guard. You would see O'Malley move back and instantly switch his timing to burst forward to catch Chris off guard with his jab or jab cross combo. As a longer fighter, he knows the smaller fighter will have to come into his range, and he's honed a sharp sense of timing to punish those opportunities. Overall, OMalleys is a very competent range fighter, and he knows how to use it well. One of his favorite signature counters is to pull the head back and fire the lead hook from a range where he can hit you, but you cannot hit him. This is one of the dangers of exchanging with the longer fighters, and we've seen this play out with how Adesanya would often pull his head back and firing his hook from a safe range where the opponent can't enter his attack zone. And you see this red attack area, he's going to pull away just enough out of range where he can attack Chris, but Chris can't attack him. Sometimes he'll go as far as to jab you just to bait you into this kind of counter where you come into his long range and he'll fade back to connect with his lead hook. Another useful counter OMalleys showed was how he punished Chris with his power shot while maintaining a safe distance. This counter is really interesting because it shows the depth of how well he knows how to utilize his range. Let me explain exactly how this works. This is actually a really useful counter if you haven't seen it yet, so stick around and check it out. But before we get to that, I know that many of you enjoy combat sports and often like to put on friendly bets, so I thought this would be a good chance to introduce you to a great casino community called Pot, also known as BNB Pot. They have a really strong community over there accomplishing some pretty impressive things. They offer player versus player betting with jackpot as a current option, and there will be some more to come with other options like roulette, sports betting, and price predictions, and a lot more later on. There's something really unique about this betting service. This ecosystem is the first and only decentralized casino service that lets you participate in these activities. Now, what does this mean, and why is it important though? Have you ever heard of casinos that kick out players who are winning too much? Or perhaps nightmare situations where services try to find reasons why they don't have to pay you for winning your bet? Or maybe even services that try to market dishonest RTP percentages that they attempt to market to players. These are just some of the many issues when the casino you're using is the house that you play against. It opens doors to conflicts of interest. Unlike other casino options, a BNB Pot is different. There is no conflict of interest of whether or not you win. You don't have to depend on the house paying you out either, because in BNB Pot, they are not the house. The bet is a fair agreement between you and the other player. Payment is done through a smart contract, and as soon as you win your bet, the winning is yours no matter what. No house trying to plot against you, and this is how fair betting should be. This is a decentralized service with no censorship, no need to deposit your funds, and there's no sign up. You don't even have to give up your personal information. This brings the power of self-ownership and decentralization back into the hands of the players. The best part is the options they have if you choose to become a staker and earn rewards generated from fees accumulated from the ecosystem. There are more opportunities like lotteries as well. This is currently available on Binance Smart Chain, but coming to 4 other blockchains as well for your own convenience. Follow the links in the description for more info. So after he throws his power shot, he's going to pull his head and pivot right behind his lead shoulder while changing his stance. So as he throws his power shot, pay attention to where his head is. He's going to pull his head right behind his lead shoulder. This takes him right outside of that striking zone. And here from a different angle, he throws that power shot, slides his head right behind the lead shoulder just enough to take him outside that striking zone as he switches his stance. This counter was really useful against a pressure fighter like Chris, and the main idea here is to throw that power hand and slide right out of range. This could be a useful tool for you to drill. When Chris pressed him against the cage, we saw a lot of effective habits from OMalleys. He doesn't just allow himself to stay complacent against the cage, and he usually relies on his footwork to get himself out of the tight spots. When close near the cage, OMalleys starts switching his stance into more squared stance, and this allows him to move side to side more effectively. And he'll typically use this to fake different lateral movements to create misdirections against the opponent. This allows him to reset himself into a different position where he can get back to working into a neutral range. Okay, great. So far, this fight with Chris has told us a lot about how he deals with pressure forward guard users, but this doesn't tell us how he deals with the kind of guard user like Petr Yan, and this is where things get really interesting, because Yan has some very crucial skills I'm about to highlight here soon. Yan is far more patient than Chris when it comes to pressuring forward. Chris would often press forward with less caution. Meanwhile, Yan is more inclined to watch a rhythm like a hawk and cut you off more effectively. When Corey attempted using misdirection to escape Yan from stalking him down, Yan didn't let him get away so easily. You'd see Yan cut out one side of the cage using his footwork and using his kicks to punish Corey's only exit point. And you notice that Jan will carefully use his footwork to cover one side and use his kick to cover the other side. Jan also has really deceptive timing when it comes to advancing as well, and these are lessons that I learned when he fought the long evasive fighter in Corey Sandhagen. Jan has a very strong sense of timing when to attack Corey during times where his feet weren't quite set well to respond. You'll notice from what we studied last time, there were many times Jan would advance forward when Corey was either switching his stance or he didn't have his feet set well to respond, and every time Jan advanced, it was in a very deceptive rhythm. The most abrupt rhythm to catch Corey even before his feet were set. Attack where the foot's not even grounded yet. Same thing, Corey gets attacked when the foot isn't even grounded. This is important to mention because O'Malley likes to switch his stance and utilize very similar movements like Corey, and this may give us an idea of how Jan might capitalize on those habits. Jan isn't to be underestimated when it comes to his ability to walk down an evasive fighter. He doesn't typically do it so recklessly, and his approach is a lot more methodical and purposeful. So in the fight between O'Malley and Jan, you might be asking yourself, is Jan's ability to attack off rhythm enough to throw off O'Malley's evasive footwork? This is a question that I want to see play out. While Jan and Chris are both guard users, Jan is far superior in what he could do from his guard, and it's certainly possible O'Malley could create openings in the guard from range, but he's going to be faced with a larger pool of threats that Jan holds at his disposal. In order to understand the important tools that Jan has, one of the most important fights to study was his fight against Corey Sandhagen. Corey is a long-distance fighter who utilizes his footwork and his range exceptionally well. This fight was important because it showed us the extent of Jan's ability to fight despite the reach disadvantage. We saw this quite a few times in various scenarios. For example, when it came to Jan's guard work, as Corey throws his signature probing jab just right outside of Jan's punching range, Jan would use kicks to combat that. Even if Jan couldn't attack right away with his punches from his guard, he would use kicks to the body and the legs as a solution to attack Corey despite his lack of reach in punching. This becomes an effective way to handle the reach issue when you use the legs to meet the opponent's punching reach. You also have to be very careful about the rhythm of Jan's guard. He always tricks the opponent by attacking them when they least expect it. We observed this in seeing how Jan would use his signature tactic to pull his guard up to get the opponent thinking he was vulnerable. This incentivizes them to come in to attack Jan, but he will quickly change his timing to burst forward to catch them off guard. So although O'Malley will have the advantage working with long punches, he's going to have to deal with Jan's deceptive guard rhythm and use of kicks to bypass his punches. And if O'Malley attempts to utilize kicks, Jan may make him pay for it, just as we discussed earlier. Jan has very aggressive defense. He typically likes to make you pay, so when those kicks come in, O'Malley may risk getting them caught, swept, or countered. The craziest part is that Jan's guard isn't the only thing O'Malley has to worry about. Jan has even more tools for dealing with evasive footwork and range. Against Corey Sandhagen's evasive footwork, Jan didn't have much issues nullifying it. One of the signature methods Jan uses to close the gap is by shifting with his punches. Jan has a very strong understanding of when the opponent will utilize distancing to avoid attacks, and he always has been able to shift into the opponent's range with this attack. Keep in mind that Sandhagen is great at distance management, and the fact that Jan could nullify it speaks volumes to his skills to handle these issues. This will become a useful tool against O'Malley. Jan is an overall veteran when it comes to dealing with reach. He's good at adjusting his footwork to make up for the distance he needs to be covered. One fine detail to keep in mind is how Jan will use a slight hop step forward to bridge the distance. This is done in a variety of ways. Let's watch this example. So here Jan's going to throw his jab, and what this does is that it's going to distract Corey, and this allows him to disguise his footwork, and he uses his chance to hop step even closer into range. You'll notice that even before Jan brings his hand back, he's already in position closer to Corey to throw his power shot. Again, you're going to see Jan flash that jab while simultaneously bridging that distance to position himself closer for that cross. And this is a skill that is executed so well and so fast that you don't even notice the footwork watching it in real time.
As a fantastic game plan, he's fighting a great fight.
The important part I want to emphasize here is that Jan has a very keen sense of when he needs to bridge his foot positioning into proper range in order to set up his power shots. Having the footwork to bridge that distance is going to be a very crucial thing to have against someone like O'Malley who utilizes distance as his primary defense. And the question here is if Jan can do this consistently on O'Malley to land his shots. One last important thing to keep in mind is what happens when Jan fights in a neutral range. This is typically where both fighters are in a range where neither could quite attack each other or land their shots, and this could happen quite often if a fighter is in a mirror stance, where both fighters' lead foot are meeting each other and their hands are also meeting each other. In this case, hand fighting can occur, and from what I can tell, O'Malley likes to fight from different stances, so there's a strong possibility that they may meet in a game of who could breach the neutral battle first. From what Jan has shown, he has a promising ability to breach that neutral game. Jan will typically control the opponent's weapon first, and then breach to that range, and he does this by either punching at the opponent's lead hand or tapping to occupy that threat, and then he breaches through. And this is actually a tactic that you see Alexander Volkanovski use quite often. Jan did this pretty consistently against Corey Sandhagen to breach through that neutral battle. When it comes to O'Malley, I'm not entirely sure how this kind of battle will play out when it comes to who could breach through that neutral range best, and I guess we'll have to see the fight to find out. At this point, you have a more complete picture of what these fighters bring to the table. Sean has a lot of effective methods for fighting long, and this will be a true test to see if those skills are enough to handle a fighter on Jan's level. This is going to be a dangerous obstacle because Jan is unlike any fighter Sean has ever faced. He's competent at handling distance, he's very dangerous in his guard work, and he has a very aggressive approach. His deceptive rhythm is going to pose a great challenge to O'Malley, but who knows what will happen. O'Malley could come out as an improved fighter and make this look easy, or Jan may come in and make this a nightmare. It's hard to get a grasp on how O'Malley would do because he's always changing and adding new things. He can be a little bit of a wild card because he does unique things that you've never seen him do before, and it throws a wrench into what to expect. Just like he would dribble a fake basketball to set up punches in broke rhythm or use his look-away fakes, he throws a lot of wild stuff that it's hard to predict. There's just so much more that could be talked about in this fight, including leg kicks that I haven't even gotten into yet, but this should give you an idea of what to kind of expect and what to look out for. You never know how a fight could turn out, and one of these fighters could get slept instantly, or maybe this fight turns out to a long drawn out war. Who really knows, but this style clash really fascinates me. So does O'Malley come out on top, or does Jan prevail instead? What do you think?